seeing if there's a correlation between economic stability and political stability. He basically went through every single country on the planet and did massive statistical models that were like, 5-way regressions, the kinds of things that you wouldn't be able to visualize because we don't have the tools to do that. So some really complex stuff. And he ended up finding some really significant results that would theoretically be able to help countries predict when political strife would occur based on their economics.
That's
really helpful.
Wow, that's amazing.
And so Luca won this first step of the Regeneron Science Talent Search. So he wins $2,000. The school wins $2,000, or the Science Research Department, which we'll use for future projects. And he's also going to be considered for advancement in the competitions. I think January 24th is the date when they're going to pick the top 40. So he was one of the top 300. The top 40 go on to Washington, D.C. for a week of judging, and they spend a lot of time presenting their projects and just touring the Capitol. And there they have a chance to compete for the top prizes, which go all the way up to $250,000, I believe, for Regeneron. So it's a really big deal that he got this really awesome accomplishment for the science research program for him. So congratulations. There's another successful Midnight Run this weekend. We keep seeing again and again and again that it's just underclassmen that are seeming to really be interested in service, which obviously bodes well for the future of the organization here at Hastings. Also a little frustrating because it means that it's really hard to sign up for it. We only have a limited number of spots, but it's definitely a good sign. And I'd just like to finish up the report by giving a huge shout out to the casting crew of the One Acts. Their show is going to be going on Thursday and Friday. Pretty special that it's entirely student-led. There's really no adult involvement, but they've put together this whole big show. Students have adapted skits, written them. It's all student-directed, all student actors. Students run the tech. I think no matter how it goes, it's a massive accomplishment that it just has come together again this year. But particular thanks and accolades to Katie Cho, who's a senior, that's running like the tech part, and then juniors Lionel Munch and Eric Gallo, more on the acting side. The 3 of them have really led the program and have created this awesome opportunity for high schoolers to realize their real creative theatrical passions. So to all those involved, break a leg. That is my report, sir. Thank you.
Great job. That's how we like to start January. Public comment? There is. So we're going to move on to the highlight of the evening, which is the presentation by Dr. Szymanski about the curriculum review cycle and its development and how it's progressing.
All right, great. Good evening, everyone. So tonight's presentation is dedicated to an update on the professional work that's taken place this year as connected to the curriculum review cycle, and that was designed, as you may recall, by the Professional Learning Committee in the 21-22 school year. So I'd like to begin by noting that tonight's presentation is really a celebration of the dedication, collaborative, student-centered efforts by teams and departments of teachers working creatively and strategically together to investigate and strengthen our program. I'd also like to note that I got Invisalign, so if you can't hear me, just let me know and I'll re-articulate. All right, so as you'll see tonight, much has been accomplished across a lot of different curricular areas. Some of the work's been centered in inquiry, some of it's been design and development, some of it's been implementation, and it just really depends on where each content area sits and how the group participating has defined the work moving ahead. So, all of the work has been bold, it's been courageous, and one of the things that I've learned over the years is that for many people, teaching, more than any other profession, is very much an identity. Like it's a dedicated group, and being a teacher is really an act of service. It's about moving students forward, and you give your whole self to your work. And so I did want to mention that because I feel like any kind of curriculum work that happens is done from a space of whole self. And there's a lot of vulnerability. It involves gain when there's new and exciting change that's happening, but it also involves loss, because to put something in or to shift something, something else has to come out. So that's done, and that process of change is not about any deficit model, but it's always about this idea of moving towards better and continual improvement. And I think it's actually the perfect thing to be thinking about in the new year, where people set their resolutions and their goals, and it's the same in the teaching profession in general. We're always working on those resolutions and thinking about what are those little tweaks that we can do to make ourselves and our work and even our administration, all of it, as best we can, and changing with the times in support of children. So, needless to say, curriculum work is emotional work, and I'd like to commend the teachers who have participated in it with me this year for trusting in each other, for fully contributing to the process, and that's included opening up their programs, opening up their practice, showing their cards, showing what they're doing, and really creating a trusting space for each other to be able to create a supportive environment and a safe space for that to happen. So with that in mind, here's our presentation for tonight. We'll be revisiting the curriculum review cycle creation very briefly, just to give a reminder of what that process was like. We will take a peek at the curriculum review cycle just to zero in on the work that was planned for the current school year. We'll explore current curricular focus areas. So I'm going to start with July 2022, the summer work through now. For each of the content areas, I've included artifacts with the blessing of whomever created it, just to showcase. I feel like a picture's worth 1,000 words, and to be able to see something that's come out of the work, and for you to be able to engage with it in some tangible way. And then what we'll do is we'll explore upcoming focus areas. So let's dive in. I'm not going to be, for the most part, I won't be reading what's on the slides. You can see all of what's on the slides. So I'll be providing some highlights of the work. And at the conclusion of each of the 8 areas, so one at a time, I'll just pause. So if there are any questions related to that particular content, we'll have a little bit of discussion there if you'd like. And if there are no questions or comments, I'll just move on to the next. And there are really 8 key areas that I'll be focusing on this evening. So the curriculum review cycle. So what I can say is all of the work that's been happening thus far is now being framed by the strategic context of the Portrait of a Hastings Learner work. So you had that presentation previously. I know we are a work in process with that. What I've been doing with the teachers with whom I've been working is when it's coming up, we're starting to think about those portrait qualities that were defined by the Portrait of a Hastings Learner, to start bringing that in to our curricular discussions. So that's in its infancy, obviously, because we're still in development with that, with action steps, etc. But a lot of robust work has happened with the portrait, and I am starting to now fold it into the curricular discussions we're having. Okay, so just as a reminder, there are 4 phases of work that have been incorporated into the curriculum review cycle. The first is around inquiry, analysis, research, and planning. The second is more of that design and development phase. Phase 3 is implementing, so putting it into action, what's been designed into action. Phase 4 is evaluation. So I'd like to draw your attention to the 2022-23 school year. And tonight's presentation are going to focus on these content areas. And in addition, there are some content areas that span, are you able to scroll? I am, great. 22-23 over here. And again, the 4 phases. And I want to also note that there are some areas that the Professional Learning Committee identified as being annual areas of focus. Tonight, I'll also be zooming in on special education, the work of the Special Education Advisory Committee. I know you had a formal presentation on that. I'll add some additional flavor there. Culturally responsive pedagogies, and I'll also mention focus on computer science and digital literacy work. There is less formal work that's happening. English is a new language. I'll mention it now. Dr. Janice Mateo Toledo is doing a presentation for Hillside around that, and that work is ongoing with the department, but it won't be an area of our focus this evening. Okay. So, here are the current focus areas, and that's also going to be the order in which we'll go through the presentation slides this evening. We'll be starting with computer science and digital fluency, and we've been doing work that's focused on the first goal of our state-approved technology plan, so that is in motion. I'll speak to district-wide health, mathematics at Hillside, world languages, FMS and HHS, physical education, that's also district-wide. We'll talk about word and language study, special education again, and culturally responsive pedagogies. So let's begin. Work related to computer science and digital fluency, again, has been directly related to the first goal that's been outlined in the technology plan. And we've had a team of technology, what we've called lead learners, who have participated in that work, and that includes our librarian at the middle school, high school, our assistant principals. We've had Janice Mateo Toledo from an Equity Lens participating in that work as well, and Katie Melly, who's our librarian over at Hillside. So our librarian / digital media specialists have been front and center, and the goal has been to create a group of lead learners to understand the new standards, which are quite robust. They don't belong to any one particular content area. They're meant to be owned by everybody, essentially, as applicable. And so the other thing that's been happening with that group is planning next steps to involve the broader faculty. How do we blossom that out a little bit more to make sure that there's broader understanding of the new standards? But the goal was to really get this group of lead learners, and they're started first as our pioneers. These sessions were facilitated by Leslie Accardo, who's a consultant and a key partner for us from the Lower Hudson Regional Information Center. She's been a great thought partner with us over many years. She's very well received, and also a whole lot of fun, I might add, and very knowledgeable. So the early computer science and digital fluency work included a review of the state's vision for the computer science and digital fluency standards, a review of the 5 key concepts and all sub-concepts included in the standards, and a review of how they're organized. And I did mention that in a previous presentation to the board, just a general overview of those standards. The group also unpacked the digital literacy standards and impacts of computing standards. They started making connections to instruction, so almost like the beginning of, in quotes, like an audit light, thinking about how do these connect to what we're already doing. And there are a lot of places where we're already connected to those standards, and we're doing quite well with them. And there are other areas where we say, okay, well, this might be an area we want to focus on, thinking about how we might improve some of the alignment there. And again, these standards are brand new. So work with the team also included, so we talked a little bit about unpacking the computational thinking, coming up with an algorithm to solve a dilemma, investigating sub-concepts related to the standards, exploring related vocabulary, creating abstractions through storytelling, debugging a program, telling a data story using a simulated data set, and also engaging in an inventor challenge. So these standards are pretty interesting because it doesn't necessarily mean you have to have a device in front of you. So there are a lot of related processes that are important to be teaching into and to be thinking about, and then connecting to work potentially with a device or with an application later. So during our professional learning pre-planning work together, Leslie and I talked a lot about how we wanted the sessions to not be a sit and get. We wanted them to be as interactive as possible. And really that's the expectation and hope for all of the curriculum work, that it's not of interest to anyone to sit in a room and be talked to for an extended period of time with curricular work. So to that point, and to stay true to what I just said, I'm going to spend a few minutes engaging you in one of the learning activities that we did. And so this one's related to algorithms and programming. You might want something to write with. This is very low stakes, by the way. You might use your device. And then I want to give you the dilemma that we engaged with to play with. And so again, you don't necessarily have to be using a computer to do this, but it teaches about algorithms and programming. So here's the classic dilemma. A farmer's been to the market and bought a new hen and a sack of corn. He also has with him his pit bull terrier. To get home, however, he must cross a river in a very small boat, and this was not a problem on his way out, but when he gets to the river, he realizes the boat is only large enough to take him and either the sack, the hen, and the dog at once. So 2 in the boat at a time. This would not matter, except if he leaves the hen and the corn alone, the hen's going to eat the corn. If he leaves the pit bull and the hen alone, the pit bull will kill the hen. So how does the farmer get them all safely across the river in the boat? I'd like you to take a few minutes to yourself, just creating an algorithm that the farmer can follow. I'll give you a hint. Multiple trips back and forth are okay. We're going to expedite the process.
We're going to get a certificate.
Try not to use more than 7 steps. Okay, so some other hints: deconstruct the problem, understand what the rules are. Make sure you understand the rules, because you can't violate the rules in an algorithm. Use some visuals. Write down the algorithm as a sequence of instruction.
Are you going to give us a certificate?
Yeah, you all get certificates of completion at the end. But if anyone wants to take a stab, I am going to give you 60 seconds to engage with this one.
I love this.
I've seen this before, so
What's that?
I said I've seen it before, so I will.
Okay, great. Okay.
I showed Bruno in 3rd grade.
Right.
It's a classic problem, and it's even apart from putting an algorithm to it, just the idea of like critical thinking, like the assumptions, right?
Yeah.
This usually fails with an assumption.
Right.
And once you break it, it's like, oh my god, they're like.
Right. Anyone want to take a first try?
Well, can I do it generic?
Go for it.
So you have 3 items.
Yeah.
But only 2 of them can exist at a time in the same state. So they have to be separated at 1 by 2.
Okay.
So that's how it starts. So you have to. The farmer usually starts by, like I said, this one he would do. He would take the chicken with him, cross to the other side, then he would come and get the dog, take the dog across, bring the chicken back, and then take the corn across, leave it with the dog, which is fine, and then go back and get the chicken.
So that's the idea, right? And so the takeaway is being able to work through this, thinking about an opportunity to provide instruction in algorithms and programming doesn't necessarily mean, pecking away, but there is this critical thinking cognitive process involved, and it then can come into coding, come into mathematics, come into all of that. So that was one of the places we engaged. Thank you for playing in the sandbox. But it just gives you an example of the type of work we did tonight. So, I wanted to pause for any questions that you may
How
have.
does that show digital understanding and algorithms then?
So thinking about an algorithm as a process, right? A repeated process with rules, and there are bound limits for it. And so it creates a story example that you can attach to, that you start thinking about what are the rules. So if you're thinking of like input and output, and then thinking about what needs to happen in order to be successful with a task. And if you were going to program something, put an algorithm in for that to run itself, essentially, for it to run, you have to make sure that you've set it up properly, so you're not bumping into anything that's going to be a conflict, so that a program couldn't run.
Got it. So you teach it in the classroom as you teach this process first, and then you show them how to talk through exactly what you
So that's one way of doing it,
Got it.
yeah. And that's the way that we engaged together.
Next question, I remember looking at the New York State computer science things, but are they broken down by age level? Or
They are.
they're
They
very
have
specific like
bands.
that?
Yes.
I think it's by grade.
Yeah. And so then it's again, what's developmentally appropriate at different points in time, what's attached to which, what's best elevated in which content areas. So that will be work for us to figure out together. At this time, the state is not assessing this, they're just expecting it. So it is a standard, we are responsible for it. We're just in the implementation, we're just in the readiness phase where we're getting to know it. It's not fully expected to be implemented yet, these are brand new stuff.
Right, and then the teachers will have to learn it to implement it in their classroom, right?
So the next phase that our lead learners group talked about was to then meet with team leaders, team coordinators, and to talk about what we did, basically as a group, and to start introducing them to the coordinators and the team leaders as almost a second tier of lead learners. But we're really, and myself included, we're all learning together. I mean, it's really, they're brand new. Leslie, again, has been a tremendous resource. She's, this is her area of specialization, so she's done a lot of deep learning around this, and she's been very supportive of our work with this. And then we're thinking, we're thinking that we'll, in the spring, do some faculty meetings, just kind of make sure people know about them and talk about where they sit. And then we want to engage people in really planning our next steps, like how do we figure out where we may need to put some extra attention. So that's not going to be a top-down, that'll be done with, and we'll figure out, the state's expecting us to implement this, and how do we best go about just getting a snapshot of where we are.
Thank you.
All right. The next area I'll be talking about is health. And work around health occurred over the summer. Drew Wendell and I met with members of the middle school and high school health and physical education team to begin the phase 1-2 inquiry and then design development processes, and we decided we needed to move to put both of those together. So phase 1, like take a look, phase 2, design and develop, and think about what we needed to implement essentially. So the work was very condensed for health. It occurred over a period of 3 full summer days. It included a review of data, curriculum, standards, research across districts. So we did some outreach to find out what other places were doing in health, and identification of measures for success for our work. The group ended up creating an articulated scope and sequence for middle school and high school health. And at their recommendation, we put big butcher paper all over all of the walls, and people were writing all over the place and making sure that everything was very visible. And then we ended up memorializing that in a shared drive. And we determined key topics for each grade level. We articulated student learning outcomes for each topic. So not activity objectives, which is another part of this, but also what are students expected to learn from what's happening. And then in addition, a series of performance assessments were created. So people were starting to create, like, how are we going to see what it is that what they're learning. So collaborative design and peer feedback were integral to the process. I remembered on the first day of the work, I put up a slide deck and I said, this is a draft of what we might do together. And I went through the whole thing. I actually started with a mood meter. I don't think I shared this story. If I did, stop me. I started with a mood meter, and they, somebody in the group, everyone reported out, I'm feeling in the green, I'm happy, I'm relaxed, I'm yellow, I'm like energized. And then I went through the day, and someone said, I'm in the red. And I was like, great, all right, let's stop right there. Let's figure this out together. I said, and so basically the message was, this is a lot. And I said, okay, so let's talk about what each of those things would mean, and then let's shift it. Let's figure out together how we were going to make this beneficial to you, because ultimately, teachers are the people that are using what we create, so it's got to be helpful. So we got back on track quickly, and that was great. And I appreciated the candor, and I appreciated the work. And the group ended up planning for an implementation of changes with curriculum to be implemented in the fall. It was positive and successful, and I have evidence of that from anonymous exit tickets that everyone completed. So, and it was great, and it set really good groundwork for the PE work, because a lot of people in that group then participated in the PE work. So the feedback was really helpful, and it really was a pleasure to engage in that work together. And I want to share an artifact, an example of some work that was underway. And this is a live document, and again, thank you to the teachers for agreeing to make it public. But I did want to show you, and this is important. So one of the things that we did, this template was a draft, and then we created a paired process, because one of the goals has always been in the curricular work to enhance coherence. And so we want to make sure we have eyes on each other's practice. So people would create their work, they would showcase it, and you can see that, and there was, using a Google Drive, we had a paired process where people would go in and then comment on a colleague's work. They were looking at like what came before them, what came after them. They would provide feedback, they would provide suggestions, and then, discussion would ensue, and then the work would continue. But again, I started this presentation by saying that this was like vulnerable work. People are showing their heart and soul to each other, and it's important that everyone feels safe, supported, and everybody knows that, any kind of feedback is intended to just be helpful. And so this is an example. We talked about framing it with a question and thinking about how to push each other forward in the work. So this is an example of the work that's been done, in the health work over the summer. So thinking about the progression of units of study, what are the learning outcomes, what are the skills that students are working on. So that really just gives you a sense. And then there's additional push that's happening as well. So the department is working within a shared drive. They have access to each other's work. One of the problems that had come up from the group is that sometimes, given the schedule for the year, they might be teaching something different. And so it was really helpful to have access to everybody's everything, to be able to say, okay, so in case that should happen again, I now have a robust group of resources right at my fingertips, and then the opportunity to see the progression. So that was really fantastic. Again, a real pleasure to work with this team, both in health and it's really all of the teams. But we had quite a good time, the health and the PE, and this particular group, we set norms at the beginning of each of our meetings, and one of the norms that this group had was frequent movement breaks. I know you're shocked, but so we built that in as well. Okay. We will now move into mathematics at Hillside.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
Are there state standards for health?
Yes.
Like there are for other things, so you have to follow those?
There
too?
are. Yeah. And we talk about, and that's actually the perfect segue, because we talk about in our work the standards being the floor and not the ceiling. So yes, we have to meet the standards, like that's what we're working for, and it being a public school, we're under the state auspice around that. But it is the floor. I think, the Portrait of a Hastings Learner work, again, is that more innovative reach of our hopes and dreams, and we're imagining our learners to be as they're moving through the system, and what we believe in and value as a system that we want to cultivate for our learners. And that's relevant to the artifact that I'll be sharing with the mathematics work, so I did want to mention it because, thank you, it was a really good segue. Okay, so Hillside Mathematics Committee has been hard at work. This committee is made up of a team of teachers representing each grade level, special education, and also mathematics intervention. And Amy and I both participate with this team as well. Kathy Williams, a name you've heard before from UQ, Stanford University, has been a thought partner with us in our mathematics journey over the years, both with the K-12 Mathematics Committee, and she helped us along with our first session. And I wanted her to be involved in that as a connector. because she sat a lot with the K-12 Mathematics Committee. And the K-12 Mathematics Committee, you might remember, created a shared vision, like a rubric, like a Hastings mathematical mindset rubric that was modeled after the U-cubed rubric, but we made it our own. And that was important because I didn't want it to get lost. There was that district-wide work that happened around that. So that is more aligned with, what are the mindset practices we want to be cultivating for our learners in mathematics. So pre-session work before we got rolling involved reading articles that were focused on mathematics. We specifically focused on the importance of visual mathematics and also neurobiology, about why it's important for students to learn conceptually and their deeper level of consolidation when they can get conceptual understanding and not just a procedural understanding. Like both are important, but to really have that visual mathematics learning. We engaged initially with mathematics learning activities, so teachers were engaged in the math, doing the math as learners, as students, exploring the connections between conceptual understanding, computational and procedural skills, and problem solving. We discussed articles. We began to develop a shared vision grounded in the research, the articles that we were reading, and again, that Hastings mathematical mindset rubric that came out of the K-12 Math Committee. So as the group moved forward, this group participated in a video jigsaw, and the videos focused on number talks with students, really using discussion to deepen understanding. And that was around various grade levels. We explored the New York State Next Generation Standards for mathematical content, so the teachers were able to look at their grade level, the grade before them, the grade after them. So again, thinking about coherence and looking before and after. And then we conducted a crosswalk between the standards. So there are content standards and there are also practice standards. So we looked at the practices as well. And so we took all of that, the research-based beliefs and values, the content standards, the practice standards, the mindset practices, and we looked at the teacher guidebook of the Eureka Math resource that teachers are currently working with. We did a data dive, so we started looking at student work samples from Hastings students, our local assessment data, so we've got the STAR, Renaissance math data, the state assessment data, just a quick snapshot of what our performance levels were. And what we did together as a team is we really worked to calibrate. So we started thinking, okay, so here are all the resources we have. We've got research, we've got standards, we've got values, and we wanted to make sure that we started calibrating together. Like, what are we seeing? What are we seeing in terms of how students are engaging with the mathematics? And then we started looking also regionally to see what are other districts using. Entering into this work, there has never been an understanding that we're making a switch to a program. That may or may not be what comes out of this work. We are in a genuine inquiry. And so it's really about looking at the data, looking at our beliefs and values, thinking about what the research is saying, and asking ourselves, where are we? This particular committee never ceases to amaze me and surprise me. It's a really interesting group in terms of how they're making meaning of all of it, putting it all together and relating it to their practice. And we've decided together, that we wanted to explore more. So the last two sessions that we had were dedicated to engaging with vendors and really investigating other resources that we've been curious about. The program as we know it is going to actually end, like the access to the current Eureka program is going to end this year. So we do have some decisions to be making, because regardless, we're gonna have to decide, well, what do we do about that? But there's no determination other than what the group decides about what we'll be doing next. So what they've decided is they want to see two in action. There are two that they really like. curricula are really constructivist, engaging, very much aligned with not only the research on how students learn, but they look really fun, and they just want to see them. So we have visits that are set up to Scarsdale and Bedford to see the two respective programs. So I have to, from afar, thank my colleagues over there for opening their doors to us. So that'll be fun. We're all really looking forward to that. So you'll have an update on that as we progress, but that's where we are in our inquiry right now. So that's math, and I'll share the artifact.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let's do that first.
Okay. So when we were looking at the resources, we weren't just looking at them. We started by thinking about how we were going to vet these resources. So we developed together a shared vision of the things that we were looking for in terms of things that we believe in and value as criteria based on the work we've been doing as a team. So here it is. So we wanted something that was going to be differentiated, that offered intervention opportunities, enrichment opportunities, developmentally appropriate formatting, something constructivist, that it applied to practice, like projects and games, and something that was going to be interesting to our younger learners, like really spark their curiosity. That it went into depth of understanding and not just rote skills. We wanted to make sure that there was exploration, that the purpose for doing the work was clear, that there was an exploratory, engaging, hands-on component, that it would be multimodal, so there was some sort of manipulatives and visuals, a digital component, making sure that that's in there as well. We wanted to make sure that there was an opportunity for professional learning. So not just about the math itself, like conceptually, but also like how do we actually use this program? That there was going to be somebody that would be able to take us through that. We wanted a strong scope and sequence. So teachers felt very strongly, and as did Amy and I, making sure that it was really nicely vertically aligned, that things were building on each other, they didn't seem disjointed. The lesson structure was consistent, so it wasn't like people would have to reinvent the wheel every time, that students would be familiar with the structure so they could focus on the content and the practice. Assessment, strong assessment component, emphasis on concepts, prioritized for assessment, ongoing interdisciplinary connections. We like that real world connectedness. That there was math vocabulary and fluency, and there you go, and you'll see the portrait of a Hastings learner come to life in our criteria, right? So this was really our first dip into starting to integrate portrait work. And again, this is very recent, and we've been using this, and that's how we came to those two that we'll be seeing in action. Some of them completely missed the mark, and we were surprised by that, and then others were really closely aligned. So we want to dig a little bit more deep. So questions about math?
Okay.
But
Not
just
that,
a
no.
small
Not that one.
point. When
Not this
you say
one.
that practice standards, does that mean you're getting into, we expect this to be taught in this way?
So there are a number of practice standards, and an example, and they're the same, K-12. So the state defines them, and it's, so for example, make sense of problems and persevere in solving them. Or make use of structure, things like that. So there are 8, and they basically are the same K-12. And the interesting part is, in some ways, the standards for mathematical practice get us closer to more of the portrait of a Hastings learner idea. That it's these competencies that if we can do well with this in terms of how students practice mathematics, that we'll see escalated growth from them. And it's this, make use of repeated reasoning, use tools strategically, right, to problem solve. These are more global ideas that we want to see our learners engage in with mathematics as they practice math. And that is a 12, that's the same. And it looks different based on how students are engaging, based on their grade. Okay.
I have a question. So Eureka Math is the elementary school math program, and then Big Ideas Math is the middle school program.
6th grade.
So is there one is Big Ideas in the elementary school too? So you have like a
So they
12?
have a lower grade variation of that. One of the things we did is we looked at, so elementary actually doesn't call it Big Ideas. We looked at it, so the vendor came and they presented to us. The elementary version we vetted through, there's a site that we connect with to see the extent to which that banded program aligns to the standards. And for that reason and for other reasons, the team felt like it wasn't the best way to go. And Amy and I agreed. You know, we felt that there were the two that the teachers selected, and mostly Amy and I just got out of the way, other than saying, let's just make sure that they're aligned to the standards in terms of this age band. It was unanimous that, you know, and I can say that like fully, like there was full unanimous decision making around where to go, you know, based on the group that was, and the second resource, we were missing 2 people that day. The first resource, the entire committee was there. They were 100%, like they all wanted to go further with them, and they were very excited about it. So it's a work in process, but for a couple of reasons, we did not move in the direction of like the version for the younger ones. With any resource, and I'm also inferring part of your question, like our coherence piece, as long as it's aligned to the standards, it can be different resources. And I'm always really careful because we teach kids and not programs. Like we want to make sure that yes, we need an articulated scope and sequence, but we also, one of the reasons that we put differentiation so front and center is because we want to make sure we're meeting students where they are so that we can escalate their learning. If we shoot too high or too low, we're missing the mark on that. But we're all in agreement with the 2 that we're going to take a peek at. We're excited for the field trip.
And the teachers will go to Scarsdale and Bedford and watch the teachers there, like actually teach the kids.
Yeah, so we planned that. So we, one of the things that we decided to do is talk about, where do we want to go next? And we did suggest field trips to see it in action, and then working with the teachers around what would be helpful. They said they wanted to actually speak to other teachers to get like the real nitty-gritty of like what is it like, in the classroom, and what's the learning curve like during the adoption in your district, and what are the challenges and what are the successes. They wanted that perspective. So, and they also wanted to see it in action. There are different components associated with each resource. So we do have teachers welcoming us into their classrooms. So we'll spend 2 hours in Bedford. We'll then spend 2 hours in Scarsdale, and it will be a pre-discussion, see it in action, and then a post-discussion. And again, kudos to those districts for opening their doors to us because it's very vulnerable and it's good. It's like a really healthy thing, and our team knows like we're going in with all heart to this. We just want to really understand what it looks like. So
yeah,
it'll be great.
What a great opportunity. So many times you can like whatever the vendor says, the vendor's gonna say, but
Right.
to hear it from the actual people who do the teaching, like
Yeah.
you should definitely do this or this is terrible. It's
Right.
so valuable.
It's so valuable, and we want to keep the work really honest and real. And if there's something that everybody loves, and then you go and talk to people and you think it was a nightmare, then
Right.
then we take that off our possibilities list, right?
Yeah.
We don't want. We were trying to avoid, but this should be joyful.
Yeah.
So we designed it together, thinking about what they wanted to see and how that would look.
Great. Thanks
Yeah.
so much.
Okay. Next area, world languages, and that is focused on the middle and high school. I want to publicly recognize and thank Katie Paz, who's our world languages department chairperson. for her really strong instructional leadership with this work. So Katie has been a real thought partner and has actively facilitated the sessions. So with some of the work you're already hearing, sometimes we're engaging with a consultant because they have a very elevated specified area of expertise and we learn from them. Sometimes it's me facilitating the work or co-facilitating with another administrator. Sometimes it's a teacher facilitating the work, and Katie has really done an amazing job in co-planning, supporting, and directly facilitating for the department. So I just want to publicly recognize and thank her for her really strong instructional leadership as a department chairperson. The department's inquiry work began with looking at revisions to the New York State standards and also a focus on interpersonal and presentational communication modes. Teachers were sharing, and we had teachers of different languages in the same room together, and that was okay, and it worked. Because what they were doing is they were sharing activities and assessments across the different checkpoints that they teach and identifying what was already being done in those two modes. So basically the how they're teaching into them. And so again, you would then modify that for your language, but basically talking about how. Then they watched webinars to deepen their understanding of each of the different modes, the communication modes. They explored student work and engaged in calibration exercises to align around the proficiency expectations. So they would share something like an audio, for example, and then they would talk about it, and they would, and if it was a language that they didn't understand, the teacher would sort of narrate a little, well, the student's talking about X or Y or Z. And then they would look together around proficiency expectations. And one of the early things that we did, and Katie took everyone through like really a rubric around like the proficiency expectations and where we would expect students to move given the level that they're taking and how much time it would be, and what we mean by meeting expectations, exceeding expectations. So that's really what we did, and this idea, and I should say Katie really took the lead on facilitating all of this, and I take no credit for that because she really did. As the inquiry work continued, the interpersonal communication mode was introduced. Session activities included discussions around changes and revisions to the new standards because they were new, and then reflection. We had performance assessments in speaking or writing. Those were the things that they were looking at in terms of the inquiry into the student work. And then really talking about proficiency targets and what we all really believe that means, like when we're saying, exceeding, meeting, or developing. The department also focused on the interpretive communication standard, and that involved defining and differentiating skills and communication modes, identifying reasons for the standard shift from language skills to communicative modes, interpreting wording, specifically related to interpretive. So what does the state mean when they're saying interpretive? Considering current practice, and then considering potential opportunities for implementation. And we brainstormed a lot. I just want to show you briefly just an example of an agenda that went out in advance of the session, so teachers knew what to expect. And again, Katie created this and sent this out, but it just gives you an idea. So thinking of the session, what's the overview, what will we be doing, what are our learning objectives, right, as a department, what are the activities that we'll be engaging in. So I just wanted to show you that. So this happened for each of our sessions, and then thinking about what we're going to be doing. She included webinars and then talking through where additional resources could be accessed. So questions about world languages?
Has there been a thought or a review about which languages we offer?
There's been some discussion about that over time, and it involves some question also around sustainability, budget, scheduling. It shouldn't necessarily be a handcuff, but these are all realities, thinking about the fact that we are a small district. It actually has some unique challenges in terms of what we're offering. There have been some conversations around that, but nothing definitive as of yet.
Obviously, there are funding challenges. Has there been any discussion about sort of shifting the focus more towards the elementary school, especially, there were budget cuts that made, that's not happening right now, but is there sort of work being done to get that back?
So there was a FLES program there when I started, and I think, and that ended up shifting. You might recall, I don't know if you know that actually, Beth, but there was world language.
I had it when I was
You
in.
had it, okay,
Yeah.
there you go. So it shifted, and one of the reasons that it shifted is because it wasn't daily instruction. It's
Right.
very hard. So if your purpose is important, so if you're doing it for a flavor and a taste of language and culture and making sure you're having some early experience with that, that's one outcome. If you're looking at it as a robust program to really develop language proficiency, arguably it really needs to be ongoing and daily. And I think the challenge is that when something goes in, something has to come out. And it is hard. So we did move away from that, and there has not been talk about bringing it back in at this time.
Got it.
There has been some talk about the possibility of other languages, but nothing that's been definitive, and certainly not for next year.
And I think the strength of the curriculum review cycle, as inclusive as Melissa's trying to build this, is that's the exact place to have these two questions examined moving forward. I've led districts that have had the elementary and very powerful world language programs in both those districts. I think this framework allows you to dig into both of them. So is this the right mix? Is it the right level? So you do it thoughtfully, because there's major trade-offs,
Yeah.
big advantages and disadvantages. That's trade-offs. But I think with a curriculum framework like this and the kind of leadership you're mentioning from Katie and others, that's the exact way to get at these questions.
And I'm also saying that as someone who loves world languages. I remember my own experiences and, had the opportunity as a student to do an exchange abroad, and I think there's a lot of power in learning language early. But to the point that was just made, there are trade-offs starting that at the elementary level as well.
Yeah.
Go into physical education. So,
Most of the world language HES is that supposed to be? Back.
that one's word and language.
Word and language, okay, well, I see it.
So the physical education department began their curriculum work in the same way the other teams and departments did. So the first thing we did was think about the structure of our work together and how it would unfold, and what would work best for engaging the work. So the teachers each shared unit progressions and student learning outcomes for the classes they teach, and they did that in a Google folder. And that fueled next steps after colleagues had the opportunity to review them. So then the teachers reviewed the K-12 curriculum scope and sequence. So again, they looked at the documents of their colleagues. Then they went into the New York State standards. They started talking about, I should have included the photo. One of the teachers was up there jotting it down. So we did also a brainstorm around current units of study. So what units in PE are we teaching? And interestingly, with everyone in the room, the board was completely filled. So we started talking about, well, what are the pros and cons of having, a particular unit and then building skills over time within that unit versus creating an eclectic amount of units and then looking at that over time. And there were pros and cons of each. And I thought it was a really good reflection, good discussion. And then we also pulled, so if there were any student assessments, the PE team said a lot of it was largely observational, so they could have hundreds of students. So we talked a little bit about the unique challenges of being able to assess students when you have so many at one time and they're moving very quickly, and how they accomplish that. And they actually do have some at the high school level where there were quizzes on certain topics. So we took a look at what currently existed, because as much as possible we want to keep our work grounded in the student work. We connected gap analyses in elementary school, middle school, and high school as related to the standards, and thinking about what might need to be augmented. We made recommendations for improvement, and the team created 5 goals for their work together for their next session. The first is to create and populate, they wanted what we call an ARC template to enhance coherence and skill development across the 3 buildings, so that we could be more deliberate in thinking about how that builds. The other thing they recommended was creating lessons to augment alignment to the standards, so actually filling in where we didn't have. And then they wanted to enhance consistency of unit planning, so thinking about how they approach their units and having a little bit more alignment on that. The 4th was creating a visual assessment template for the reason I just described. And the 5th was to consider innovative practices. Again, Portrait of a Hastings Learner was front and center. So I wanted to create an artifact. I'll show you an artifact, an example of the work underway. And so this is the ARC template that we're at. And so this has been done so far via Google. So we planned this together as a group, and then we've been back and forth thinking about, does this make sense designed this way? And then the next session we have will be a work session, because they really want time to populate that and get in there. But you can see it's really thinking about the state standards, thinking about standards and skills, and they want to think about the build across the different schools. The units will, based on, whether it's basketball or volleyball or how it's being taught, and then they'll elevate the different skills and standards, and that will all be in one place. So that is where we are with PE. Any questions there?
Is the new part of that all the schools are working together?
They're delighted to have time together.
Yeah,
for
I mean,
a
is this the
couple of
first time they're
reasons.
really like,
Yeah.
that's the difference? Because I'm sure they've done that with the standard and the skills individually for each school.
That's right.
But it's the point is bringing it all together, so it's like a cohesive.
That's right. So I think, so feedback that I received was that they were grateful to have time as a priority. Like that the district was saying, PE is of value, and we're going to be in a room together, and we're going to have a think tank where we're all there, and we can think about it. And to your point, yes, so there's teachers have been doing excellent work. They've also mentioned that they're not always aware of the excellent work each other's doing, and this creates an opportunity to see it, and to be able to say, okay, and now what else do we want to do to tweak it? So that's where we are with PE. Okay, next is word and language study. Yeah,
Just a preliminary question for word language. Are we talking about literacy?
We are.
Okay.
We are. And so this is work that's happening with Gravity Goldberg and team. And word and language study is the focus at Hillside. You can see what's been happening. So there's word study introduction. There are actually stages of spelling development. So orthographic development, like what comes first? So, where are they? So when you're thinking about, word study, you're thinking like when you're a young learner, when you're writing the word cat, you're going to start with writing just the letter C. And the instinct might be, well, no, you have to write CAT, but there's actually a development that students will write C, and then they'll write CT, and then the A will come in there eventually. So there's development that happens, and then our instruction can push kids along the way to move through those spelling stages. So that's just an example, but that's what's been going on. And so Word Study has focused on grades 3 and 4, and they are implementing Words Their Way, which is a differentiated program. And Language Study is happening grades K-4. So think vocabulary, think grammar, think punctuation, think about how that all fits together. And that's been K-4. I've had the opportunity to observe that facilitation in classrooms with teachers taking the lead on. I've seen a couple of things. I've seen teachers facilitating lessons. I've also seen the consultant facilitating, and then the teachers doing a fishbowl, watching certain things implemented. But one of the things I really love about the word and language study work, language study I'll speak to specifically, it's being connected, and as it should be. Like, they're reciprocal processes, reading and writing. They go together. So it's nice to see that there's instruction happening around language study and how to be doing that within the context of reading texts, and then seeing how that would then translate into how you would provide that instruction in writing. So being able to see that has been great. It's been very robust work. I can give you an artifact on that, and that is here, because I think this really speaks volumes, just to be able to see the work. So there's been a launch plan, so kickoff lessons, notebook launch. So this is a resource for teachers. There are also resources for students to help self-directed learning. But basically this is done in cycles. So there are morning routines, there are spelling routines, and this is word study, by the way. I know I'm toggling back and forth between word study and language study. So think vocabulary, spelling, right? They go together, but I think that's probably the cleanest way for me to present this. But there are ideas that are meaning, like what do words mean, and also spelling routines that are associated. And you can see here, so basically this is a guidance document to support teachers, and this is core routines and teaching and what it might look like over a multi-day cycle. So this is example of work that's been happening around this. Introducing the cycle, choice-based routines, spelling routine choices. So again, there's autonomy there, but there is a cycle, and there are different things, different ways to be engaging. This is something that students might see, and although this is for teachers, it gives you a sense. On a 7-day cycle, it might say, Group A, you're on day 6. Do your old sort, and then you have these other options for what you're cycling through. And then the next day they would come in, and okay, Group A, now you're on day 7. This is you're still working on your old sort, but here's what you're going to be doing with that sort. So it just shows you, I actually have had experience implementing this. This is a really phenomenal differentiated program. I want to give a shout out to the teachers, because Words Their Way is not for the faint of heart. It is a hard program to implement. It is highly differentiated. It requires a high level of teacher expertise, because you're constantly differentiating for your learners, and the sorts are based on ongoing formative assessment data that you're collecting to then adjust the sorts that you're introducing, and you're regrouping students and you're moving them through things. So big kudos to our 3rd and 4th grade teachers, because this is I think it's really a gold standard resource to be implementing, and it requires very high teacher expertise to be able to do that well.
So this is like a replacement for Wordly Wise?
It's a core resource to be using. Wordly Wise is, there are different things that you can pull in from other resources, but this is a sort-based program. So for example, you might have a sort based on a whole bunch of word patterns, or what we call onset and rhyme, fright, night, light, etc. And students may have that with some other spelling words that fit in there. in that same spelling stage, but then they have to think about, well, what goes together. So it isn't, yeah, I mean, it is their core resource.
Let's ask a question. You kind of addressed it a little bit, because it's impressive to look at, but just one question I had was, is there such a sort of matrix of variables that have to be managed? You know, does the team, do the teachers feel like they have the support to be able to manage it, the horsepower
Yeah.
to manage those things in real time?
Yep.
That sounds like a heavy lift.
So Amy's been lead on this in terms of being closest to the work, and what I've been hearing and seeing is that people are doing very well with implementing this. Again, it is a hard resource to implement. It is not easy, and in planning for this work, one of the key things that I've been thinking about, had been thinking about together with Amy, is removing obstacles. Like, part of my job, I see, is removing barriers for people. Let's make it easy. How do we pre-prepare the sorts for people so they have one less thing to do? Like, how do we get everything into people's hands so it's like ready to go? What kind of professional learning needs to be happening on an ongoing basis so that it's feeling strong and that it's going well? And then being able to make sure that, wherever there might be hiccups, that we're addressing those. But my understanding is that, and again, this is secondhand in terms, because I'm not in everybody's room every day, is that it's going very well, and there's a high level of expertise and professionalism and great work that's happening on a differentiated level with the kids. Okay, so next area. Special education, and there was a robust presentation by Laura and Tesfa to the Board of Education with some of our special education advisory committee members who joined for that as well. And so I'll just give a brief recap and talk to you about our next steps. So again, the committee's been using an improvement science process to guide their work. They solidified their aim, which is to increase student self-efficacy for students with disabilities based on themes in the peer-reviewed research literature that emerged. The theory of action that the group created was, if we increase student self-efficacy, then we will improve the academic performance of students with disabilities, and students will feel supported, comfortable, and confident to pursue whatever path is best suited for their individual success. So that's the theory of action we're operating under. Committee members looked for solutions-focused research on strategies for cultivating self-efficacy. I believe that happened after the presentation to you. And they worked individually in partnerships, collaboratively as a whole group, to discuss articles and identify potential solutions to the problem of practice that was identified. We've been creating a driver diagram, and the idea is, like, what are some key drivers? Almost, when you think about root cause analysis, like, what do we need to do to get in there and target to be able to see impact, both for the system and then ultimately for students. And students, again, are usually the lagging measure in terms of the growth. So things happen, in the system, and then we see change for students. Our next session is going to take place on the 12th. We're going to be finalizing our primary driver and our what we call our secondary driver. What are the things we need to focus on? And then we're going to be working to develop change ideas and associated action plans. Those are going to be actionable steps that are taken to address the problem in practice. And so I won't share the artifact. You have it. It's the presentation to the board, but it's in there for public record and for all of you. Okay, and then culturally responsive pedagogy. So I will present on behalf of Janice, Dr. Janice Mateo Toledo, who has taken the lead on this work, and she and I meet regularly. So in the curricular realm, she has many and varied responsibilities, and in the DEI plan, we're focused on those year 2 goals that are in there. So she's been designing, co-teaching, and debriefing culturally responsive lessons. So at Hillside, one example is art. So she's done a push-in collaboration to support the design of a work of art by the students that's ultimately going to become the mural. So the mural that is funded by HEF. It's about to be created. Also in 4th grade, she's been updating and co-teaching Sparks lessons, so the early courageous conversations lessons, but specific to 4th grade. At Farragut Middle School, she's partnered with English around lessons within the classroom there, and also courageous conversations, individual work with each teacher, so she has each on a cycle, and she's co-teaching the initial lesson and then releasing responsibility to the teacher, and then she's providing feedback. There have been initial discussions with department chairpersons around a culturally responsive curriculum audit, and that was on the year 2 of our DEI plan. And so we're in the process of reviewing a curriculum audit tool for departments that's directly linked to the New York State Culturally Responsive Sustaining Education Framework. And that came out of feedback from the department chairs. We had used an NYU scorecard for a while, and it was fine, but the chairs felt very strongly that we should have something at our fingertips that was really related to the framework specifically. Both are good for different reasons, but we wanted to honor the feedback that was given by the chair, so I'll share that artifact in a moment. Janice has been working to support the principals to consider professional learning opportunities for the district, so Center Lane, and then also for high school, middle school faculty meeting, and that focused on gender inclusivity and language use. Upcoming, there will be some work that I'll speak to in just a moment. Ensuring a culturally responsive lens through which to look at the computer science and digital fluency standards. So again, she's been sitting in on that work through a cultural lens, considering digital equity. And she's been taking the lead on the Facing History and Ourselves work, which is just about to begin and took a tremendous amount of behind-the-scenes planning. So that work will start on January 27th. And then there will be work in February and in May. And then upcoming, Diane Goodman. I know Diane is there on that 3rd bullet, but that's really an upcoming. So that the idea is that we'd like her to support understanding of affinity groups and adolescent identity development and why it's really important to have affinity groups. And then 3rd grade curriculum work around the family unit of study is upcoming, just around the corner. I think she's doing that tomorrow. Presenting the Hillside faculty around English language learners and inclusivity. I think I mentioned that at the start of the presentation. And I'll share the artifact. So this is, and I'll be just fully transparent. This is in review. This may or may not be what we go with, but I did want to share, here's exactly where we are in process. And so it's a draft document, and you'll see the 4 areas, the 4 principles of the culturally responsive sustaining education framework. And really it gives a chance to take a look at the practices and where are we. So it's a self-assessment, and then thinking about lessons and resources that exemplify the practice, and just being able to think about that. This will be then used in terms of formative data for Janice's ongoing work and partnership with the teams moving forward. So that's the goal and the thought around this particular tool, and we're in review. So I'm not sure which way we'll go with it, but this is the thought, and this is in front of the chairs for review now.
I have a question. You made a statement. I'm not sure. Is it on? Okay. You made a statement about principals and administrators. The DI coordinator is going to work with principals and administrators on professional learning on DEI. I want to understand in what context. And just to be direct, I believe that I know in recent times, educators are receiving as part of their training this work of culturally responsive inclusivity. Our administrators equally need that too. because sometimes by virtue of being principals or wherever they sit, there's the assumption that they know this work and they don't. And
Yeah.
there's
And
more to this than I want to pour out
it's a very
here, but
good point. And-
I want to understand what that context meant.
It's a very good point, and I include myself in that as well. I think it's really important to just be engaged as an ongoing learner. And so the work that is being done in terms of inclusivity, in terms of gender, inclusive identity, in terms of race, in terms of disability, it's really about making sure that, it's not just, like, if there's a faculty meeting, everybody's participating there, regardless of the role. So if you're at the faculty meeting, you're an administrator, you're a teacher, it's for everybody. But it's also around Janice being a thought partner together. She's pushed my thinking quite a bit. She works with the principals. If there are questions that come up around anything related to culturally responsive practice, it could be involved with curriculum, it can be involved with discipline, it can be, Janice has been a real partner in thinking about professional learning and thinking about how we move forward and support. So, for example, we identified a need. I think there was a question around affinity groups at the middle school, and what's the value of affinity groups, and why do we have that? So thinking about professional learning that's supportive to be able to help people understand, like, here's some thinking about adolescent identity development and why this would be really helpful to our students. But your point was around not just zeroing in on teachers, if I understood it correctly.
Not just teachers, not just our students, but also the principals have to understand that social context that our education sits, because the fact that I'm a leader of whatever doesn't mean I'm knowledgeable of that information, and that needs to happen as well, because a whole lot happens. That's all I will say.
So, yes, and it's a good point. I will also add that
I think our kids are great, seriously. I personally think they don't even see all of this till they get influenced otherwise.
I wanted to also highlight that Janice will be joining me. I was asked as part of my curriculum council. I'm part of a curriculum council through Putnam, Northern Westchester BOCES and Southern BOCES. It's the northern ones I tend to attend for the learning sessions, actually. So I was asked to facilitate for the regional learning session related to some of our work here in Hastings, and so I will be joined by Janice, by Tesfa, by Jennifer Spirelli, and by a student to be talking about the DEI work that's been happening here, and what we've been working on, what we've been learning, and then engaging regional assistant superintendents around reflection and planning forward for their own district and thinking about where they are. And it'll be symbiotic. It's not that we're suggesting that we do everything the best at Hastings, but rather we have work that we can offer that we feel has gone well, and we have had bumps along the way that are normal and that we work through together, and just really having a thought exchange with the region so that we can serve together as this unified powerhouse of moving forward.
Thank you.
Can I ask a quick question regarding, 'cause we're looking at academic topics, assessment or a look at, through the lens of the students, it's built in.
Yes.
When we're talking about culturally responsive pedagogies and practices, how does that piece show up, basically?
Yeah, so it shows up in two ways. Part of it is separate and part of it is built in. And where we are right now is we need to make sure that we have one of the reasons we developed that culturally responsive curriculum audit is to think about where we have some ongoing opportunities to do further augmentation, depending on self-assessments and thinking about where to move forward. But we do build that in. So even in, I can give an example, the mathematics resource. So we look at mathematics vocabulary. We also look at, one of the things that our committee was asking about is, does the resource come in another language? Because often, if students aren't performing well in a content area, if it's not in their native language, it's not because of the content, it's because of understanding the language to be able to show the content, right? So thinking about how we do that. So it is front and center in terms of being integrated in that way too. And it's separately as well. So in Hastings, we've had a Courageous Conversations course that has been part of our curriculum over time. We are also building in, so Janice sat with the 5th grade teachers around some social studies work that was happening at the end of last year is another example. The ELA work that's currently happening, thinking about diverse texts or diverse authors and thinking about just culturally in terms of making sure that what you're reading and who's writing it, that they've done research before they've started writing it, right? So that there's a more comprehensive lens on being like a critical consumer of who's writing what and, you know, what's the homework that they did to be able to be writing it. So some of that sits within the curriculum and some of it sits separate, and it is its own curriculum.
Yeah. I know they do something in the colleges. I don't know whether it's transferable here to your point. So, for example, anatomy and physiology textbook, we are beginning to include darker skin anatomical bodies because we've only had white ones in order to show if you have inflammation, your inflammation on your integument is different from mine. So that's all part of culturally responsiveness. They have, I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong. So it's just that, like, even examples, like they encourage math professors, and Jeremy, tell me if I'm wrong. Like some kids know the game of rope skipping, and so maybe using that example, if you're in a predominantly teaching in a school that is those people that when they are playing, they are, you know, and use that as an example because it's more responsive to their culture or what they do. So there's more to it than just DEI and race.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
I
and
just
to your
want to
point
say
about
that, yeah.
implementation, right? So this came up in the computer science and digital fluency work. So one of the resources that I introduced was the Algorithmic Justice League, and they do some really interesting work and thinking about, you know, unlocking your phone or putting your hands underneath the automatic water in the bathroom if you go to use the public restroom, that it activates for some people more easily than others, and what's the programming that goes behind that, and who has access to what. And so it is folded into the work that's happening, and again, in some places it's more front and center, and in other places it's discrete, and then again, in some places it's an additional consideration in addition to the content. So I think it's all of those.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I just have a quick conversation. A parent had asked me this, and I wasn't sure of the answer. For Courageous Conversations, you know how Facing History and Ourselves is like a program, and we buy it. So I know that Courageous Conversations is the trademark name of an organization. Is the work we do in Courageous Conversations the same as that? Like you buy the program from the Courageous Conversations company?
No, so we actually, it predates me and then it's evolved since I've been here in terms of revision, but teachers here designed it and they pulled from different resources. So Glenn Singleton is the Courageous Conversations person, right? Like he conceived of Courageous Conversations and this idea of the compass, and people enter conversations about race in different ways. Sometimes from an intellectual stance, sometimes from a feeling stance, sometimes, you know, different ways. So the resources that are created for Courageous Conversations draw upon other resources. We've developed it. We were approached by the region multiple times to actually, whether or not we could sell it to other districts because people were interested in it. We did look into the possibility of doing that from a revenue generating stream, and this predates Bill. There were some considerations about why that wouldn't be easy to do, just from a trademarking perspective. But our teachers designed it.
Right.
and
So-
the facing, yeah, so there is an issue with the name there, but we've looked into that, we think and this all predates me, but
Yep.
that is Hastings' own program, has created this conversation.
Right. And we're allowed to use that name?
So far,
It's not
yes.
trademark, you know?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the potentials going out to sell the program, we're looking into that. I've lost track of the answer on
Yeah.
that, but I think we can, move on to that right now. I think facing, because we want to keep things moving.
Yeah.
Facing history is actually a way to facilitate districts, and I've worked with this since 1990, going back to Chicago, Cleveland, the Archdiocese of Boston. So it's really a program, you're not buying it, it's professional learning for teachers to bring in really inclusive, woven in work. Yes, there's courses, but they've increasingly, facing history, moved into much more comprehensive, weave it in approach, training and support for teachers,
Got it.
which we could talk more about, but
Right.
that's,
That
It
one's.
So-
seems like people are liking the basic history programs.
it's course specific. Hastings has had it, and the move now, done listening very carefully to teachers, was to go slow on this, but this is to bring more broadly than simply a course. Have it
Yeah.
move into multiple courses through multiple teachers, and that's kind of how facing history's evolved in the last little bit.
I see, thank you.
But may want to move on, so.
Yeah, so just to conclude, you can see the upcoming focused areas there. The one area I didn't speak to yet is, there are a couple. So science is going to start in the spring. We'll be working with Liz Muir again. Teachers really wanted her. They liked her. Got really positive feedback from her. You can see where everything else is going and where we are. ELA, we're in some discussion phases about when we'll be launching there in terms of the inquiry. We have a meeting on the calendar for next week to talk about basically the plate and where we are and readiness for the system to begin the work. We want to make sure we're constantly taking the temperature. And I again want to just say thank you to everyone who's participated in this and given feedback. It has been for sure a professional highlight for me. It's the work that I love doing the most, is rolling up my sleeves and being supporting teachers to support children and designing together. And again, it's emotional work and I honor it. I remember when I was a teacher, if someone told me I had to give up my poetry slam, I probably would have cried. It's emotional work, change around curriculum. Teachers put their whole self into their work. We have very dedicated professionals in this district, and it really has been a pleasure, all of it. So I just want to give a public thank you to everyone who's participated.
And let me, if I may ask, I'll be quick. We brought you a lot tonight,
Yeah.
because this is a pivotal moment. I mean, it was a year ago when you all said, yes, work on this, get moving. Melissa designed that, reached out for models and approaches. Models is a bad term, frankly. Approaches, designs for this process curriculum review. And so we're mid-year, a little bit of a lighter meeting. There's a key update coming from Maureen. We just thought, let's come at you with that full picture as to where things are. Got it to PowerPoint ahead of the weekend and talk more about it. But we know we brought you a lot, so almost a 90-minute presentation. This is pivotal, fundamental stuff. Witness the question, Doreen, you had, Gus, you had, once you have frameworks like this that are inclusive, not top-down, sharing in that, that then you can get to other big questions. But good entities, educational entities, have these frameworks to use. And again, it's inclusive, which makes it a little more slow going, because you got to listen and be responsive to the teachers.
If I can ask a question first. A lot of this stuff is sort of heading into phase 3, right? And I find it interesting, a lot of the indicators that are developed across the different subjects. What do we want to be able to say that we did, basically, or what do we want to see reflected in the students? When you move into phase 3, or is there a notion of it when you're talking more about implementation? Sort of the thought that I have is that we have an extremely sophisticated group of teachers in the school who teach their own ways. When we get into implementation, how do we honor or make use of what different people do differently? Or how do we sustain that we're not just squeezing things down? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I can give an example of, and Steve, you're in the room, you're welcome to comment if you wish. I can give an example of the big ideas work that we engaged in, grades 6 through 8. So one of the ways that we did that is we created implementation agreements together. We said, these are the things we want to agree to implement in this way so that we have a shared experience that we want to talk about. And here are some other things that we may want to dabble with. Often when you're implementing something, to do everything all at once well is very hard. And sometimes you focus on key areas and then you come back together, you talk about it, and you say, how did it go? And I'm actually, Jennifer and I were just talking, we're due to get back together with the 6 through 8 teachers. I know one of them's out right now for math, just to, again, have that ongoing check-in of like, okay, so now how's it going? We're in the implementation phase. There is not an intention to be cookie cutter. We are not trying to standardize, we're not trying to create, teaching's a very creative process. So to your point, and also the students are different in terms of what their needs are, right? So I'll go back to what I said earlier, we're teaching students, not resources. And the resource, the beauty of the resource is it supports coherence. So as a student is moving from room to room or across a system, they'll be able to have some shared experiences so that they're not receiving wildly different instruction. So one of the pieces of feedback that came to me from the Big Ideas work is we have a teacher that was providing intervention instruction in a learning lab, for example, and was raving joyfully about how beautiful it was to have students from different rooms coming in and be in the same unit of study to say, okay, now I can maximize my time with this group because they're all in the same topic, right? There's value in that. So part of it is around having an agreement of what the adoption will look like and what are the non-negotiables, and again, that gets co-defined, and then to be able to say, oh, and there's also creative license too, because there's never a desire for like to be cookie cutter, but standardizing versus coherence, right? It's a good thing to have a degree of coherence and to have the same things to talk about and have minds of your colleagues having an alike experience to be able to help each other grow. It's like a synergy that happens there.
Excellent, thank you. And I want to thank you and all the teachers for putting in this tremendous amount of work. And
Yeah.
I feel like this is the sort of connection back to before pandemic, where all this stuff was supposed to happen, help us get started years ago. So welcome back, and it's an auspicious start. Thank you.
And I think that it's probably complicated and challenging for a lot of the teachers, but especially I would think K through 5, because if you're a math teacher in the high school or middle school, not that that's not difficult to implement change, it certainly is. But if you're like in the elementary school and you're teaching all of the classes, to have like every change at once.
Right.
So is there like a rollout plan so that like this year we're just going to focus on math, say, and so the teachers don't feel overwhelmed? Because I can imagine it would feel overwhelming to suddenly change everything.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that so much, and it's real. If you're a generalist and you teach every content area, it is pure pain to have like 5 things shift in one year. It's just, there's no way. It's not fair. I just feel like So in the curriculum review cycle, we did consider that even in the initial design last year, which is why the curriculum review cycle itself is never meant to be carved in stone, static document. It's really meant to be a living document. There are reasons why something was planned to be implemented and wasn't yet implemented. Like the idea is to keep the foot on the gas pedal and making sure that it's not pressed too hard to the ground, and that we're being considerate and thoughtful and doing it in a way that's going to support students and teachers rather than interfere.
Yeah, because I know we want to wind down. It's an excellent question, particularly elementary level, and I've lived the pain on that at the receiving end in other places. So I think the advantage again of this framework is you can then prioritize. You can say, through this review cycle, we've learned X here, makes sense. I'm going to be focused on K-5 with all respect to the middle school and high school teachers in the room, because you're spot on. So, so we gotta keep the gas pedal down, but we also have to look to use multiple pedals.
Right.
You know, not just that image of boom, we're just charging ahead, as opposed to when do we move in certain areas, is particularly elementary.
Right,
Uh,
right.
And we may have to pull back on certain things to say, let's go there. But do that by listening and working with teachers. And it's a dialectic, right? You know, it's sort of, okay, we're hearing you, maybe we need to nudge here or not.
Yeah.
But it's definitely not one speed all the time.
Yeah.
But this framework allows you to figure that out and prioritize.
Great.
This is really great.
So,
The work's been fun, so
Yeah.
I can say
Yeah.
that. I mean, I really, it's been joyful, it's been rigorous, and I've appreciated it, so thank you to our faculty.
I want to thank you. This was very in-depth, very thorough. I actually went through it before coming in, and I am so grateful that this very difficult work, you're calling it fun.
We had fun. We actually
Because I
had
know
some
it is.
disgusting jelly
So
beans
thank you.
on the- built in some-
So thank you. I really want to say thank you.
Very well done, Melissa.
Thank you very much. Moving on,
She did good.
we have included reports online from the superintendent and business official. And we're going to move on to business items.
well, no,
I'm sorry.
no, we're gonna, Maureen's gonna present a wee bit on hers.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's just.
Yeah.
work.
Yeah, just because that's a key verb. So we really had two verbals for you tonight, to use a new term. We had Melissa's piece and now Maureen's piece.
So, yeah.
I'm staying silent to give them space.
Okay, so we'll do some facilities update.
We got the email.
Thank you, Patrick.
So, yes, tonight, typically we just put my report in the record, but just wanted to provide a very quick update to where we currently are within our building conditions review and multi-year programming that we began actually last year, and just to kind of give you an update on where we are and what to expect in terms of deliverables to the board. So, just as a reminder, this is a requirement that districts are, under the state guidelines, we are required to engage, I'm sorry, I'm just saying so tired, our architects and engineers to come in every 5 years to do a pretty comprehensive analysis of our district facilities, and that includes kind of looking at all the physical structures, all the electrical, all the things that, the boilers and such, and then in addition to that, also to look at how we're currently using the building and if there's any need to do any type of modifications. And I think what we learned in the last time we had this done is that we really didn't go as in-depth as we needed to not only understand the current, but really we've taken a lot longer with this particular process because we're really looking at a 10-year lookout, because to properly plan for our facilities, we really need to understand not only what we're currently doing or what we're doing next year, but to have look at both enrollment and what projected programming, some of what Melissa spoke about. There could be even things that come out of curriculum review cycles that may push, some thinking around facilities. Because as I was thinking about with one of the things with the FLES program at Hillside, it had been previously scaled back for a number of reasons that were not financial previously, and then right prior to doing the renovation at Hillside, we didn't even have a classroom to support it. So, I mean, even from a physical standpoint, we didn't have the space, and that was also what impacted the instruction because the teacher was on a card and that reduced the minutes. So, facilities do matter, and if you don't have the facilities to, sometimes you can't have the programming either. So our architects and engineers, they began this work last year. They have been now on site, which is what they do. They do more like interviews with key administrators who really are collecting the data and understanding from both working with the guidance department, looking at current students, projected students, They've actually taken all of our floor maps, overlaid all the schedules on top of those to understand the exact amount of time each classroom's used each day. They've looked at potential schedules for next year. They're looking at current enrollments. They're asking us for, I believe it's 10 years of projected enrollments at the high school level, 7 at middle school, and 5 at elementary. I guess that's the standard for them to, do a really comprehensive plan for us. They certainly, we've done things before where we've done things and then had to redo them because really in a year or two time, they don't, the thing needs change, so we're really trying to avoid doing that, because it does cost money when you do things like that. And then they're also, the key component that we've been really spending a lot of time with the architects and engineers are also looking at our special ed programming. One of the things recently in speaking with Laura Sullivan and TESFA, they had hoped to potentially bring some students back in the next year or two, and quite frankly, in order to bring them back, we need to do some significant renovations. Well, significant, a big word, but there'd be significant rooms and definitely some modifications to rooms to provide what they would be required to bring these students back. So again, even if something's 2 years in the future, that requires a lot of planning, and that has to be folded in to see if we could even physically do it in this building. So just as you can see here, these are the different things that have happened thus far, and just to kind of go into where we are going next. So they're actually, as I mentioned, they're analyzing the use of each room, coming up with a color-coded matrix. I think sometimes they try to understand, is there ways to better use space? Again, I'm not saying that they will find that, but they're also working today. I know they had a conference call with some of the guidance folks to try to get some more questions that they were looking for answered. They're also now looking at our outside facilities as well, because they also are looking at athletic programming and things like that. First, we're looking at what our current needs are. I mean, most people may not realize that when people say they add things, we don't always have the space to add things. We also are looking at our external partners and the people who use our building and seeing like what impact that has on us long term, and seeing if there may be some suggestions on modifying some of the athletic facilities as well. So basically, just to give you the updated timeline, I just wanted to kind of breeze through the first part, but where we are currently is we are looking in the next month or two to finalize those space utilization and provide some short-term and long-term recommendations. Priority is at special ed, because there's a real timeliness around those programs and the students that we're slated to try to build programming and also bring some of our students back into district if possible. Then early March, we're going to meet with the administrators to find out maybe some of the recommendations the architects may have on how to modify current spaces, or some ways to flex spaces to work for us. And then by late March, we hope to have that draft of the 5-year facilities report. And that's also for just the things that need to be fixed, like sidewalks and things, and then also to look at the programmatic space changes. We hope to have that presented in final form to the facilities committee come April, and then to the board, subsequent to the facilities committee being able to review the recommendations of that report. Some of the things that we'll be thinking about after that is how does that fit into our 5-year financial plans, and also whether it be the use of the capital reserve or some other things we may contemplate. If there's some of the items that are identified in that report that may make us consider, would we be wanting to either access some of those funds to work on some of those things. So it's really an extremely important component as we look at our financials, because as we know, facilities planning is quite expensive. This is not to scare you, that we have done a tremendous amount of infrastructure work the last few years, but I think we need to start thinking about not waiting so long so that we don't end up with $20-25 million bonds, but rather think about strategic ways to build out some of this work. But right now, a lot of what is driving this process is programmatic versus our infrastructure, except for maybe 1 or 2 small projects, we're in pretty good shape there. So the things that are be suggested are probably more on the maintenance side of things than rather like larger financial, big infrastructure projects. So that's where we are with this.
Thank you. It's interesting, it's sort of like curriculum review
Mhm.
and portrait, and now facilities review, and they also go building at the end. So it's-
If I may, Alex, I mean, I'll make something that's probably obvious to the entire board, but you just now have had the kind of things you need to look at. Big look at curriculum, because that shapes so much in facilities. And if you care about high-quality teaching and learning, you got to have the right curriculum, inclusive, not top-down, brought from within. We also have to make sure your facilities are state-of-the-art. You're sitting in a space such as that, but if you're not looking long-term on it, you're going to run into some issues. And the special ed one, there's some desire now to be very innovative. It's been there a long time, but now it's literally space chain, locked in. And so it's now sort of figuring that out. There's one more example. But again, this is the big picture kind of stuff you would hope we're bringing to you. So I actually,
That's great.
I'm just sitting here. It's them brought it, so I'm very pleased that they did it. So.
Yeah, it's just lovely to see some of the integration that's going on.
And we'll get into further detail. I mean, this is just a high level, just to kind of give you a time frame. But as we get into, even in regards to special education, even though some of these things are like 2 years down the road, it does require us to kind of have that plan. Because as you know, with anything, any improvement to facilities, we have to get a permit. It's a lot of steps. So even if we were hoping to bring some students back in a year or 2 years' time, it would kind of require us to make some decisions in the next few months.
Excellent.
So Maureen, question.
Sure.
So this is a programmatic requirement, right? So it's more the space planning and programming rather than potential projects to accommodate an extension or space changes, repairs. Is it everything, or is it more
It's everything.
planning and space?
It's everything. It's the
So
basis
it's
for the whole.
Will they give you costs as well?
Yes, yes.
And that
So
could
I
go
think I
into
may have
the
included that.
project.
So part of the 5-year plan has cost projections, and they have to kind of develop that. And then depending upon well, typically they'll put a current cost projection, and then depending on what year they believe that we would need to do that work, then we build out inflationary costs for that. Like if we weren't going to do it for 5 years, then we add in whatever we think the cost of that work will be at that time. We did have like some of the infrastructure things that we know that were on our last 5-year plan. Much of what you plan for doesn't get accomplished, and then it rolls to the next one. So we did have kind of a starting point. There's some older elevators, there's just some infrastructure that doesn't, when you see it in total, I caution everyone not to get nervous, because it will always be a large number, because it'll be just like your typical things that you'll be, some of which need to be done now, some of which can be bumped to 7-8 years out. So, but particularly we're focusing a lot of our energy on the programming, because how we kind of end up at where we were at Hillside was because some of those things were, particularly around some of the special ed programming, like when you develop the programming, there's a space requirements, and we were really out of compliance. So we're trying to be, not only look at what our current needs are, but then also be thinking, and actually Laura and Tesfa did a tremendous job, and really they plotted out really like moving students through the system. So it was very comprehensive thinking around, not that every student will come here, or they may or may not, but they do have a very good sense. So some students who may be currently, say, 4th or 5th grade, they're looking at, in 5 years' time what their needs would be. If they're, some of those students are currently here, some of those students are currently out, and we hope then to provide a program here for them. So.
Any other questions? Thank you, Marie. We're going to move into business items. It's a queue for yes, thank you for a very good report.
You can also stay.
I will tonight. I'll have to get them to you.
All right, moving into business items. Are there any questions or comments about business items 1 through 6?
I have,
Oh, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, Maureen.
I guess a process question on the warrants, because it's like 18 pages of services and different things, but the claims auditor, how is the audit? Like the person that signs off that says, I've reviewed, I've audited, is it a sample size? Is it like
The whole
comparing
thing.
to receipts? Like, so they actually take each one and say, this matches billable hours, for example, for legal, or?
They have to review and approve all the documentation for each check. That's, whether it's $12 or 500,000. They have to kind of look at the contract, all the documentation, all of the invoices and anything that was generated from there. If there's tracing it back to like the original contract, like the proposal, so kind of the whole, that's why actually it takes a long time. That's why sometimes when people need a check, I'm like, you have to tell me, because like she has to come in and spend quite a bit of time doing this review.
Thank you, I would imagine. I had a question on number 2, bid management. Do you know what that was for?
Number 2?
Yeah.
Oh, the
Invoice for
E2 exchange. So yes, so we this is a group that assists us with our competitive bidding for, so each district is, there's a certain amount of money through the federal government. It's called E-rate funding, and it is for infrastructure, technology infrastructure and communications and things such as that. And in order to have all that work bid out for us, people use this company and they do a cooperative bid for the region, and this is our participation in that bid. And it helps us get funding. So I think this upcoming year, this year I think we used about $36,000 in awards we received. So they assist us in securing that funding and also help us bid out, get we have to put out a public bid for that work, and by doing it with other districts we get better pricing. So this is a service for that.
Okay. And then my last question was on number 4, Omnia Partners.
Yep.
Is that related, or does that compete with BOCES? I wasn't sure kind of reading it. Is it like a conglomerate of?
No, so when you see things like this, so when we participate in a number of different public bids. So anything that we purchase either has to be on a state contract, a sole source. These pens, like, people say, well, why can't we buy, it's cheaper here, but everything we're required to buy through some type of cooperative bidding. Anytime we participate in a cooperative bid, and some of them do not cost us any money, the board is required to adopt the language in order for us to participate. So this particular, this is one of the bids we participate in, and they recently sent it to the accounts payable person, like, oh, did we send you the document for your board to adopt? So you'll see those from time to time. Occasionally we'll participate in other districts' bids as well, but it's kind of language to allow us. So if the point of what you said with the warrants, if we're purchasing, they'll say, well, who are you using? Like, what bid are you using to do that purchase? So it's kind of tied to that. And quite frankly, like, you're allowed to participate. We try to participate in as many as we can so that we can have access to as many different types of vendors.
It's better pricing, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of the idea, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the idea is that a lot of them are cooperative bidding, so we're supposed to, we get better pricing because of that. So even, as an example, if you look up on a website, a price, we typically get a better price if we access that through a bid that we participate in.
Thank you.
I have a question about the items for disposal.
Sure.
Are we like throwing them away?
Typically they're recycled. I just want to see what these ones. This was
There's
okay.
like
So
smart
yes,
TV.
So there's two things. So many of these are on our fixed assets. So anytime there's a piece of equipment or anything that is part of our fixed asset, we're no longer using it. It's either completely out of commission. There's no way we can sell it or get anything for it. We then the current value is not that what you're seeing on this list. That was the purchase price. These were not depreciated assets because they're technology. So if it were the value, it's just that's the unit price that we paid for it. So as an example, the first few I can tell you what there were the Z-Space computers that were, I don't know if any of you are familiar with them. They were purchased I know with superintendent we purchased them under, that's how I think of time, but I think it was like 8 or 9 years ago, and they were in a lab, and then they were used for some time, but some of those more, I guess, robust type of like technology type things, they really don't last that long either. Like they were updated a couple times, they weren't being used, then they were being used as just like kind of desktop computers. Long and short of it, they're kind of out of date, out of circulation, and BOCE's even on behalf of us, because we purchased those through a grant that we were given, I think through HEF, quite frankly, and they were not being used, they were not, I think, working correctly, that they would have been any use to us. And there wasn't any other district that either was using that type of, you know, or if they did, they had newer ones. So they were offline, they were sitting in a tech office, and they go to be recycled. So we weren't able to. Occasionally we'll try to sell things, we'll try to get something back, but typically with technology, what's occurring is they go to BOCES to be recycled.
Yeah.
So, but
I just didn't know if there was any districts that would like to take them, you know, the people who need them but
Right.
don't have grants and don't have them.
I mean, some of the.
I don't know if they don't work, they don't work, but if it's
Right.
just that we upgraded our system, but they're still perfectly fine, maybe there's disadvantaged communities someplace that would be happy to have them.
No,
I
and to
don't
be
know.
honest with you, I believe that they were they asked around quite a bit, but they were not being used, my understanding is, at least for a few, I don't even think they were like connected. Once they were removed, they were in a lab that now has been converted to another classroom, so they were kind of in a computer lab setting. And then I think they were either being used as like a backup desktop somewhere, and then they were like, they're not even as good as like the desktop, which is much less expensive, that's sitting in offices. It couldn't even be like used for that. So I mean, they had them in the tech storage for at least a few years, and then finally just they had to. I was, you know, I was like, oh God, we can't, because I knew it comes off the fixed assets. There were
I
a
just,
large amount.
you know,
of
wonder if they
I
really
know.
recycle. I hate to
know.
think of them like in a landfill or.
I know. Well, they are recycled. They're
Yeah.
all of the components, anything that anything with technology is always recycled.
Okay.
And then the remainder, of course, are just like older Chromebooks that are completely, as you can see by the date, that would not be, they're not of any use. And they probably were broken, I would imagine.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any more questions or comments about business items 1 through 6? Is there a motion to approve business items 1 through 6?
So moved.
Is there a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Moving on to placement services for CNC with CPNC. Any questions or comments? Is there a motion to approve CNC and CPNC placements?
You're getting this right.
Yeah, we got it. Yeah, we're both getting it. Hopefully it'll match.
They got it.
Hopefully it'll
Melissa
match.
D is purposely resting.
Yeah.
She
Wait,
offered to
wait,
do
I-
this online, I said, no, you're not, you're resting.
Yes,
Yeah,
that's
I know.
nice.
I'm just
Wait,
double
wait,
checking,
you both-
sorry.
That's why I'm saying so moved to help. So
Yeah,
moved.
thank you.
Wait, so you said she's.
See, it takes 2 people to do what Melissa D did.
Can you imagine that?
Takes 3.
Well, I knew that on the business items.
Sorry,
Dr.
I
Wagner-
couldn't resist.
I'll rewind a bit. Is there a motion to approve our placement services for CNC and CPNC?
So moved. Oh, sorry.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
We're going to move on to personnel as a consent agenda. Any questions or comments about our appointments or amendments or our leaves of absence? Is there a motion to approve our appointments, amendments, and our leaves of absence?
So moved.
Is there a second? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
If I just make a quick comment here, you've already voted on it, so there's this multi-point twos here you just voted on. That's a real quality move. So yes, there's some remuneration for these 5 listed teachers, but we went out, posted, searched, could not find the optimal candidate. So the best move for Hastings to do this. And we have good agreement with the union on this. So this is, in an old phrase, a win-win, but really it's looking out for the quality of who's in the classrooms for Gus and all of his colleagues.
Moving on to our minutes. Any questions or comments about minutes from our last meeting?
second.
All in favor? Second public comment. Moving on to agenda review.
Sure, I'll be brief again. It's looking as I've called it, your course of study as a board for the year, and we've rounded one corner. I don't think we're quite at half year yet. Gus, you could, as a student, probably give us the exact midpoint year, right? Next time maybe we're getting close. But anyway, for the board, we really now are about to move into budget season with you. So next meeting, Maureen will bring to you some basics around the initial budget, not yet the budget, but just what we're going to actually call tax cap 101.
And also we should have.
Thanks, please.
So today, many of you may know that Governor Hochul gave a state address, and I think in that she has at least said that she's still committed to, fully funding that foundation aid, which was really music to anyone's ears, like myself. So the good news is, my understanding is by January 17th, we'll have our first look at what the funding may look like for us. So I think that the time of the 24th meeting will be good, because I think we'll have a little bit better information to start discussing.
Yeah, so that's what's listed here as initial budget. So that's the framework, larger outline, Don. That's actually what you asked me in the gym today earlier, where we are on this relative to governor. And then you can see as we move to the next February meetings, much of that's going to be around the budget. We do have at this point on the 7th, we are bringing for the second year a State of the District update. We did that last year. Let's see if we got appetite for that. It's a narrative, heavily narrative. So the team is working on that to bring you that. And we will look at, it says on the far notes, include academic growth and performance update. Melissa and I will determine if that actually needs to be in there, or this is pure narrative. We seem that this was helpful to you as a board and community. So that's where we are at this point. I won't go further, but those are a few key highlights for what's coming.
Thank you. Board of Education comments. Any comments, thoughts?
Yes, I have a comment that I prepared, which I told our superintendent last minute, so he has, and I'm sorry about that. I usually I'm more active in giving him that information, but I forgot about it and I was reminded. So this was based, this information I'm about to share is based on the report from our superintendent, and the item is about the dimensions of gender parent information session, which I know that my two colleagues here may be familiar with it, because the educators even here and parents that have reached out to me literally made me know that they had expressed those concerns to both of you even before you became president and vice president. So I typed it down so that I'm succinct, because I talk a lot. So I just didn't want to, so I'm going to read it, my thoughts. So as I had mentioned, this was something that was brought to bear, this was brought to me, and my stance in my public service is that diminished voices and their concern is something that I'll bring to the table regardless of what I personally think or I do not think. It doesn't matter to what I think. What I wanted to say here is that the concern to this work is a dichotomy in terms of the philosophical ethos or stance that we all may share collectively or separately in our society as it stands today. Some of these individuals that brought this to me shared some concerns, as I said, with our current respective officers even before they held that office, as they had alluded to. I want to openly share, I want to openly say this, that my colleagues, all of us, and these individuals that they had mentioned, did our due diligence in our collective work here in our district, in our board meetings, in our policy meetings, and work really very hard to bring a balanced, equitable work in instating and establishing the district's DEI policy. We gave each input, whether it was a loud one or a whisper, equal weight. We had outsiders show up in our policy meetings, which is public, so people can come in, and we had disagreements, huge ones, and I mean, those who were there publicly saw it. But what we did was to bring in those voices, deliberate on these obvious dichotomy that we have in such issues, and we came to a consensus and to a final product, regardless of what our ethos and stance were, because we believed in a matter of building public value. I know that my colleague here has publicly mentioned that we delineate family value from public value in some of all of this. So what I'm about to share is similar to the same concern that arose when students were, and these were even high school students, I think, were being given the Harvard IAT, the implicit association test last year, and there was a concern that it's okay for us to raise concerns and get the clarity on it. And so I am no expert in anything, but the little I know is what I'm about to share. And I know our educators will listen and sort of help to, we are all learning, even if we are experts. Experts are beginners who don't quit. So we are all beginners even when we are experts. So what I want to sort of emphasize on with such concerns that was brought is that we are trying to embrace coexistence and not to shame each other in doing that. So personally, some of you know I work in the work of race, and I've had white folks being very vulnerable to me with the fears they have about race in connection to racism, and how if it's not being done well, they don't want to come near it. And I have given the listening ear for a work to be done that requires all of us in order for us to not shame each other, but work towards that coexistence that we are all seeking. So I only say this to run this parallel with the concern that was shared with me. So first, the concern had to do with the elementary school as learners. And I saw, so I get this thing that all I'm seeing is gender. I'm not seeing sexuality, right? So I don't know what they know, and I'm not going to judge them, but I'm like, it's gender, not sexuality. So I think that delineating gender and sexuality is very important, because sometimes with this work, it just seems like it's all the same thing, and there's a difference. So of course, we are living in a society where we have hegemonic structures. Hegemony meaning that dominant social stance that we ascribe to. And so the work of DEI is mainly to pull marginalized forms so that we're all on the same plane, and not to create imbalance for now to diminish the hegemonic ones, because two wrongs don't make right? So it's difficult work. That's all I want to say. It's a very difficult work, and so mistakes will be done, and when mistakes are done, the open to correction can allow for the progress. So I personally, so there are two things that I am going to share, which is basically a very surface cursory part, which is one for gender, rightly so. So the sexuality part is what I want to talk about, which is one of the concerns in a more direct way. So one of the parents spoke to me and stated that their kids were engaging with other kids in a public space when they overheard them moving from one person to another, saying that, who are you attracted to? Who are you attracted to, a boy or a girl? Like, and the parents was quite, and what the parents said was that they were not comfortable with that happening, and they felt it came from the classroom. And I'm like, I don't think kids are kids. I don't think it came from the classroom. But this is what I would say, that again, they thought I'm a board, so I'm trying to be defensive. But I said, I promise I'll bring whispered voices to bear. So that's what I'm doing. And I'm not the only person they've spoken to. So I'm glad I'm not the only board that they've addressed such concern. But what I wanted to say here is that I believe that in terms of sexuality or sex and attraction education, it has been a very difficult topic from time immemorial, even when heterosexuality remained as a sole structure that should be practiced in our society. So sex education is difficult. Whether you're in a space where embraces just heterosexuality or not. So I would ask that whatever is being brought here is looked at as sex education that is of a concern to these parents, so that with the elementary age group, that conversation should be appropriate, whether it's heterosexuality or homosexuality. So that's a part that I want to state, right? That and I personally just saw gender. I did not see sexuality, and I know there's a difference. So again, I'm not sure what's going on, but I just said, let me throw this out. That way, what needs to get done gets done. So thank you. That's my board comment. I was succinct, right?
It's a kind of, I really appreciate the respectful way you brought that forward, Dr. Lang. And I think, to be clear, it's in my update, a link is to the Dimensions of Gender program on the 31st. And I think that letter was very carefully written by the team listed there. And I think a key sentence is that we are confident that regardless of individual values and beliefs about this topic, issues of gender, all children, like every child at Hillside, let's just extend that right out through all of Hastings and all of our district, will be treated with kindness and respect. Fundamentally, that's what we are aiming for here. Center Lane, who's been a partner with Hillside, will now be a partner at the middle school, because we're trying to be systematic, if you will. I mean, that's kind of a big word on what's so fundamental here in a human endeavor. But so we can be consistent, and it's fundamentally that regardless of how a family thinks about this and feels about this and has been raised about it for whatever reason, that we will treat all with kindness and respect. And we have to be talking about these things from the youngest of ages in developmentally appropriate ways, but fundamentally so there's kindness and respect. The only other thing I would say is any family, any parent who has a concern should go right to Hillside with this. Should go right, starting with teachers, go right up through Amy and others on this. Start there with any of those questions and conversations. If it's a Farragut Middle School question, if it's a high school question, start at that source and place. And again, we've spent a lot of time on this to be as careful as we can. Again, that sentence, a lot of words here, but it's, we are confident regardless of the values and beliefs of this topic, we're going to drive towards treating all with kindness and respect. So I don't know if we need to talk more about this, but I just wanted to respond at this point.
Thank you very much. Actually, I want to bring something to context. So remember I told you about the DEI. I think it should also be not just our students and educators, but also leaders. Only because those educators that also told me they have shared it with you, with the both of you, said that that's exactly what I said, because I'm all about communication and engagement. So I said, why don't you talk to your colleagues directly and to the principal directly? That was my first response. And this educators, and again, they don't teach my child. I have one child, so even if I see them, my fusiform area, I can't recognize them. Like the way I couldn't recognize you, it took a long time for me to, because my brain is not used to white faces like black faces, so I couldn't. So it is normal. It's not a bad thing, but so I told them, I did say that, and that's why I'm saying that sometimes we don't even understand the dynamics. Is not just educators, teachers. It's those in the leadership as well. So I just want to state that. That's why I said the first thing I said. Yeah.
As a former principal, I remember.
You know what I
learning
mean,
and
yeah.
engaging in professional learning. To your earlier point, there is a major difference between gender, sex, and sexuality.
Mhm.
And there are very big differences around when and how that should be taught.
Correct.
Depending on how parental age.
Correct.
Thank you. Are there any other?
If I could, I know it's getting late, but this was in Bill's update, and Alex, you also wrote a note, but I did want to mention in this forum a huge thank you to the facilities team that worked Christmas morning.
Oh,
And so
yes.
Carlos, Robert, Terry, Nick, Darren, Terrence, Joe, Emilio, Kevin, and Juana. I forgot everyone's name. Really giving up their holiday and
Yes.
preventing a lot more damage to the
Yeah.
facilities, right? Possibly mold and all that comes from that, pipes breaking, et cetera. So really a big shout out to them. And lastly, a shout out to Bill and to Michael S. I don't know the last name, but on a few weather things that have come up, which I didn't realize require a lot of like sleepless nights, watching and getting info and then coming back and saying, it ended up being something just before we entered Christmas break. And then Monday was a possibility, but it ended up being nothing. But this is how weather goes. So there's a lot of work behind the scenes that goes into that.
Thank you.
Early
Thank you for
mornings,
bringing
I
that.
think,
Yeah.
You're like a super and Al Roker.
Yeah, it's true.
My magic wand is that those decisions never are made by superintendents. But I own them, so complain all you want whenever. I appreciate the compliment, but Michael is a brilliant source. Thank you, Doug.
All right, thank you.
Michael is Michael Schlachter
Thank you.
is a local resident.
Oh.
I was next door neighbors with him my freshman hall at college, and I ran into him 25 years later in Hastings. I heard his name at Chemka Pool. I heard him say my name. I'm like, I have not heard that voice in 20-some years.
And I-
Look pretty much the same.
And
Couple extra pounds.
I know we're trying to end, but Michael, this is my third stop making those decisions. My daughters in Greenwich remind me of the morning once there was no snow and we had no school. And who made that decision? Or that there was snow and we still had school and had to rush. And so Michael is the best colleague I've had. But at the superintendent's learn, we own the mistakes and complement the successes. So thank you, Michael. And thank you, Joe. Thank you. The Hastings Police on this are excellent. So it is a team effort.
All right, thank you very much.
I just want to just echo the thank you to Melissa for really taking on this curriculum review process. I think when we listened to that presentation, there's so much detail in it, which you have to manage like a four-dimension kind of chess game with the topics, people, where to push, where to pull back. And I think to Bill's point, the idea of making something like that inclusive is extremely time-consuming, and it's so easy to just look for places to shortchange and just make an executive decision. And your commitment to not doing that is appreciated. I think will have a really long-term broad impact, not only in the curriculum, but in the relationship with the leaders in the system, the teachers in the system. And it takes time to really nourish that. So I just want to say thank you.
Yeah.
And I think, I also want to thank like the teachers who have been here for a long time, who are embracing that too, because, I know it's so easy to be like, if it ain't broke, why fix it, right? Like it's a lot of work for them. So to anybody choosing a new mindset and trying something different, it's challenging. So I applaud them and thank them for their efforts. It's very open-minded and really appreciated.
yeah, I would piggyback on that. Again, thank you, Dr. Szymanski, and the teachers, and department chairs, that, you know, all of this work, which so many people want to see done, it only happens in collaboration, and it's impressive to see. So thank you again. Any other board comments? No? All right. Is there a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? December. Thank you.